What's up, Inspired Girls? Welcome back to Inspired, the podcast all about being designed for a purpose, discovering self, and being transformed by dwelling with God. As we soon wrap up this season of the Inspired podcast, be sure to pay attention to our Instagram and emails for exciting things coming up. I'm Jessica, and I'm on the Inspired team here at X Church. And today, as a checkpoint of sorts, we asked the question that we talked about way back in episode 1. How are you doing with your New Year's goals? Sometimes we're great at sticking to them, and sometimes we fail miserably. There are a variety of inner and outer pressures that push us toward perfectionism. Friends, family, social media, comparison. And when we buy into the idea of looking perfect on the outside, it can cause us to live duplicitous lives. In this episode of the Inspired podcast, we talk about what living a transparent life looks like. When we choose to live transparent instead of perfect, it cultivates a life of authenticity. Hello and welcome back to episode 10 or 11?
10?
10.
10.
No,
10.
today was...
D8.
No,
I don't know.
Who
It's
knows?
a dime episode, a dime piece, if you will.
Oh, yeah, but it's good to be back. Whatever number we're on.
And since we're, headlong into the season, and I thought we would maybe jog our memories and look back and think about our first episode of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're, 3 months?
Yeah.
In.
Yeah. It's
And
March.
that first episode,
It's
if you
March.
remember, we talked about goals, New Year's goals and resolutions. So acting kind of like a checkpoint. How are you doing? Okay, so Megan, this is Goal Master over here. How are you doing in all those goals? Have you got married to your fiance yet? Nope, you can't check that off because it's not really a bullet point list.
So this is what I was talking about when I was setting myself up for success, because I knew at my checkpoint that I would be fueled in confidence, knowing that I'm still making progress towards my goal. Because since then, I have found a makeup artist. I've found someone to do my hair. We've ordered florals. So, my goal to get married is progressing, and it feels great.
Man.
Oh well.
I'm thinking like makeup artists. I definitely did my own makeup.
And
my own hair. Actually,
I don't know if I could do
rewind. I got my hair done the day of my wedding, and I took it out and redid it because I was like, I do not like this.
I feel like I would do that. I would do that for sure. But there are a couple other goals. What else did I have? My recipe box. So this is how that's going. I have an album on my phone now that's for screenshots of recipes, but I've yet to put them onto cards. So I think the most I've done is like sorted through what I want to eventually be on a card. And now it's just taking the step of, this is my reasoning. We are in the house buying process. So I want to see what my kitchen will look like before I buy a recipe box, because I want to see what type of backsplash we're working with.
Guess what? How about you just pick a
What?
recipe box out
Yes.
and then you design your kitchen around your recipe box because that's not too outlandish.
Logically, I'm thinking, okay, $20 recipe box, $2,000 kitchen remodel. I could replace the recipe box if I need to, but the remodel is something that I should probably base my recipe box on versus the other way around.
So what you're saying is that the recipe box needs to go with the kitchen.
Yes.
Why?
Why?
Because
Just
when I walk into my kitchen, everything's
you
just
want
going
to
to
see the
flow
recipe box
very nicely, because that's an area. My kitchen is like my sanctuary. It's like that is where I want people to walk in and just be like, oh.
So if something kind of clashes, that would really...
Yes.
that would throw off the ambiance.
Jordan really wants to keep his cereal bowls from throughout college in their watermelon print.
Oh, that's cute.
And I was like,
I don't know about cute.
I don't know if I can do that. And he was like, they're behind cupboards. I said, I'll know where they are.
Or in your kitchen remodel, you can do some open shelving and display those gorgeous watermelon bowls.
But those are like summer season. They're not.
Where did he inherit
season.
watermelon bowls is really my question.
I don't know, but he loves them. So it's a point of contention right
This
now.
is what you need to do. Here's some marriage advice. You need to find out why he loves those bowls so much. Is it the design?
I do
Is
need-
it the
that's good.
depth? Is it the width? Is it the lip on the bowl? Because like I
Oh,
mean, you
yeah.
got to sip out the
Yeah,
milk somehow.
That's true. You don't
Is
want to
it
get,
like the
caught.
depth? You need to find out what,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just find a similar bowl
Okay.
that matches exactly what you want, and then you both win.
And then he'll be like, how much did you pay for that similar bowl? And then I'll be like, and I'm back to losing.
You could find them at thrift stores.
Oh my gosh.
But what was my other one? Oh, Sabbath is going really well, actually.
Good.
I really thought that it was going to be, I'd write down that I wanted to have an intentional Sabbath, and then all of a sudden my Saturdays would be clear and free for me to do whatever I want. But it's looked more like saying no to a couple things and not really having like a do nothing Saturday, but more just like a less committed Saturday.
Ooh, that's
so
good.
far.
That's a good place to start.
So I'm just kind of like,
change the pace of what you're doing on that day.
I'm
Yeah.
just slowing down the pace on Saturdays.
Cool.
And that has been like, that's already shown a measurable effect on my life.
Janice, what about you?
I haven't started my college course yet. That was one of the things. That's one of the things. If you all remember when we talked about goals, I said I was sitting over here, shuddering. So because I don't
Cringing.
Yes, I don't function that way. I can have a recipe box in my kitchen that doesn't go with anything, so I'm okay with that. But anyways, one of the things I had shared was an online course that the Bible Project offers. They offer some graduate level Bible classes, and no, I have not started it yet.
Hey, well, you still have 9 months.
I know. I'm still okay, but no, I haven't.
I'm still okay. I'm
Well,
fine.
actually,
Everything's fine.
Janice still has the rest of her life because we don't do New Year's resolutions
Oh, right.
over here. 9 months is just a number, not a mindset.
Well, this is true.
Mm-hmm.
I just did my vision. Every year I do a vision poster. I save up magazines and then cut all kinds of things, pictures and words and
cool.
stuff
Oh my
like that,
gosh.
and then I put it up in my sewing room, and I've done it for years. And so I just did mine, and I always have a section that has something to do with like me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I found was that age is just a number.
Oh, I love
That's beautiful.
That's so
It's very true.
cool. I've never heard of doing that. I
Well-
think mine would have to match my kitchen. I'm just kidding.
Oh my
I'm
gosh,
kidding.
it
I'm
would.
kidding. I'm kidding.
I'm failing at my New Year's goals. Well, because I had talked about how I kind of like have lived around 3 words for a couple of years, and that's simple, sustainable, and cool. See, I even forgot the last one. So
lost me too.
we're doing great over at the Castles household, but I am breaking one of our, well, not breaking a rule, but this past week we have just signed up all 3 boys for one sport. But which like we've never had all 3 boys in one sport like at a time. We've always said you can only choose one sport at a time, but we've always had the luxury of like our youngest being too young for sports, and then 2020 happened.
Oh, yeah.
And then they grew up over that time, and now sports are happening again, and we're out of the pandemic mostly, sort of, hopefully, and they all want to play a sport in the same season, so spring. So Jude's playing soccer, and Indy and Phoenix are both playing baseball, but Trey is assistant coaching both baseball teams, and I'm assistant coaching Jude with soccer. So
Oh my gosh.
so sustainability, nope. Like we're gonna burn ourselves out in 2 months, 3 months, and simple, not so
I
much.
was trying to say how that doesn't sound very simple. Oh my gosh.
So, but I just thought I would do all this in light of just being, transparent. Like I'm failing at my goals or my expectations of 2022, but I think that, I say being transparent because I think that when we set goals and when we, look forward to what a year can bring, I think that in some sort of measure, we all kind of come up to the wall of perfectionism.
Oh yeah.
And
for sure.
so I thought it would be, amazing today if we all talked about those goals setting us up for perfectionism, and what, like, the flip side of that is transparency. Vulnerability, transparency, actually showing that we don't have it all together, and that our goals might be goals, and goals are good, but what does it look like when we're practically living out those things and we're running into personal perfection, what we
Yeah.
expect of ourselves, and then also like what ends up transpiring and what we can do with it when we don't reach those
Yeah.
expectations.
Yeah.
And so, I guess what are some pressures of things that we have going on in our lives that cause us to have this lofty goal of doing things right and beautiful and lovely and perfect?
Yeah. I actually was just looking into this a little bit. I was reading an article about how one of the most notable things that has been a huge contrast in our culture versus previous generations is this idea of a creator culture. Not in the sense of like we all have a creator in heaven, but in the sense of we actually employ other people by consuming what they create. So things like YouTube channels, Instagram, TikTok, we have created jobs for people who create things that we consume, in a sense. And so one thing that has, I believe, become a huge impact of that is what they're creating, we are consuming, on whether you want to or not. I mean, you can listen to the radio and consume something that someone creates. You don't have to intentionally seek out something that someone creates on beauty to stumble across it. You can be scrolling Facebook and an ad pop up. And so now we're faced with these things that we consume every day that paint pictures in our minds. And I think that for me, that has been a huge source of comparison. Because now I have so many things to compare my life to, and to compare these different aspects of my life to, and someone's getting paid for producing them. And I think that it's so crazy that that is in every aspect of our culture now.
I think that, like, you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about comparison. I think that has a lot to do with how we internally process our expectations, and then like the vibe that we give off. Like, do we want to show people around us? I mean, there's filters like crazy to make your face look beautiful when you're not wearing any makeup. There's social media. I mean, there's reels, there's pictures, there's all kinds of things that we get caught up in this creator economy, to where like the content that we're putting out, the content of our lives that we're putting out becomes someone else's consumption.
Yeah.
And so when you have that stress of someone is consuming me and my facade, it creates this stress of us having to live up to a certain standard. And I think that it puts us on this hamster wheel of perfection.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think, too, you end up comparing yourself to something that doesn't even exist. It always, when I see someone, posting pictures or something, and it's very obviously, okay, how many filters did you use on this? And you're like, no, just don't do that. It makes my heart hurt, because it's like, I really want to see you.
Yeah.
I really want to see you. I don't want to see the filter. I don't want to see, how you've altered things and things like that. And I think that we do such damage to each other because we're presenting something. It's like we're hiding. It's a mask. We're hiding. We're not being genuine. We're not being, really, truly who we are.
Yeah.
And therefore, we can't even celebrate who we really are.
I know. And it's so sad, because I get caught in this all the time, is not feeling like I'm enough. Because if we were just to simply be ourselves, we would look, because of all of the social media that we have access to, all of the filters, all of the ways that we can hide our true selves. If you were, it's almost like for me, and this is the way I feel, is if I were to actually just be my raw self, it would look so weird.
Yeah.
Just like, where's your makeup? And don't you have any dignity? And, why, if my house doesn't look this way, or if my parenting doesn't look this way, I would feel overlooked, because what I see is what is beautiful and what society or culture says is beautiful and motivating. And is like before and afters of a clean bathroom, or before and afters of a facial and filters, like, before and after losing weight. So we're constantly having this comparison picture in front of us. And if we don't measure up, then we start believing this lie of like, who we really are without a filter, without, a preface, without some sort of something that goes before us is not enough.
Yeah.
And that is really dangerous. And that's why we're just not our true selves. But I feel like, so in this kind of thing of perfection versus transparency, I think that at our core, we all want to live a life of transparency.
Yeah.
But I think what keeps us from that is fear of not being accepted.
Insecurity.
Yeah.
Yeah, just being really insecure if I was really genuine, because I think that's really what transparency is really being your genuine self. What would you think of me? What would these people think of me? And I don't want to deal with maybe their judgment or with their disapproval.
Yes,
disapproval
is big.
and the disapproval, because it's like that's like that. The pain of that is more than we can think of. I'd rather just be not myself or not genuine and be a people pleaser than to actually be me. It takes a certain amount of growth and really security into who you are, just to say, this is who I am.
Yeah. It's almost easier today to put a mask on and act like we have it all together, because the cost of just being ourselves is too great to bear.
Yeah.
Because we're not accepted.
Right.
But I think that we want to talk about our struggles and perfection. I think that we kind of talked about this before, and we each thought of maybe one area of our life that we struggle with perfectionism versus transparency, and it was actually hard to narrow it down to one, because it's so, it's like a poison in your life to, so who wants to go first?
I'll just go ahead, because I feel like I've been too transparent in some of these episodes. So, and when Janice was talking, I just felt like daggers, because she was just speaking straight into my insecurities when it comes to not being enough and I think that stems from my desire to please others. And for me, it's a lot of it is, it's either, if it's not at my job, which it always is, then it's whenever I'm in service to someone else. So that can be having people over for dinner, or taking on a project for someone, or even like submitting. I'm in a course right now, and even submitting papers that a stranger reads and puts a grade in online, I'm like, it has to be absolutely perfect. Like, they cannot think anything less of me because I didn't explain this well enough. And Jordan will be like, Megan, you have no idea who that woman is, and she doesn't know you. And I'm like, but this is still a reflection of me. And so for me, it's when I have people over, I want them to feel like they're at home. And so I try to create an environment that would reach into everyone's needs, even if it's not just what I need. And so I want to have everything that everyone could possibly want, whether it's 3 different flavors of coffee creamer or matching plates or whatever the case may be. It's like this perfect setup so that no one would ever think, oh, I wish that
less
this was
of
here.
you.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I would be so much more comfortable if Megan had this in her house. And it's been especially pressuring with planning a wedding and buying a house because I spent 35 minutes the other day wondering and researching if I should fill my clear water vases with water or not because they're tall.
Or what?
Or just nothing.
Oh.
Because they're like 24 inches tall. And I'm not even kidding you, I scrolled through comments for 30 minutes and I saw one and it was like, water is clear, so how will you know if it's there or not? And I was like, seems so simple when you put it that way. But to me, I'm like, well, people think it's weird that I have floral centerpieces and no water in the vases, but really I don't want water in them in case someone knocks one over and then my guests will have water all over their pants and they'll be uncomfortable at my wedding. Like, these are like,
wow,
rabbit
that's a rabbit
holes,
trail.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so for me, it's whether it's I spend my time, I spend my money, I spend my thoughts. It's like I want to create that perfect environment for everyone when at the root of it, everyone's perfect environment is different. And so I find myself in this like unachievable
like
goal.
Think about the person who, because I feel this too, that in my home, I want to have a home that is safe and inviting.
Right.
But I think that in my effort to do that, if I'm not careful, I can spin out of control and think too much about it and, go in those rabbit holes and chasing this idealistic, perfectionistic view of what I want my house to be.
Yeah.
But the truth is, it almost might alienate someone
That's so true.
to a level that like when they come in your home, they feel like they can't ever measure up.
Like,
and
yeah.
That's it's been hard for me on, on this journey of becoming more transparent is that I have to know, and I'm not saying we should cater to everybody around us. Like, I'm not like, if you feel most comfortable in an environment that is messy, I'm not going to like mess up my house in order to make you feel comfortable. But knowing what my true self is, I think is so important in that like, I like a clean house. And so like my house will be clean and hopefully I don't alienate you.
Right.
And make you feel
Right.
unwelcome because my house is clean, or you know what I mean?
Right. And when it's so funny that we set these expectations for ourselves, because for me, my expectation is that my house will be stocked with everything anyone could ever need. But whenever I'm a guest in someone's house, the last thing I will do is ask for something that I need. You know what I mean? Like, I do not go into someone else's house excited because they will have all the gluten-free food and organic chicken that I'll need, But like, I put that pressure on myself to provide those things for other people.
So in other words, you have expectations of yourself that you would never have of anybody else.
Right. And I think that rings true for a lot of perfectionist ideas.
Yeah, I looked up the definition of perfectionism, and it says a disposition to regard anything short of perfection as unacceptable. And it was like, oh my gosh, there it is right there. I mean, it's like you can, it's like I didn't have three different kinds of creamer, and maybe they wanted this one, I didn't have it, and it's like this big, stamp comes down and stamps unacceptable.
I just pictured the big red stamp too. That's so funny.
But that's not, it's really not true, but I think that is part of the problem is that our concept of what is the perfect environment or whatever it is totally different from somebody else's. I like that you said that, Megan. I know when, just when you said, let's think of some things, my background as far as my degree is in music, and I started taking music lessons and went through a conservatory training in college and things like that. The emphasis is on being perfect.
Yeah.
it's performance,
Yeah.
out and out performance, and it needs to be perfect. That's all, and anything less than that is unacceptable.
Red stamp.
Yeah, red stamp. You know?
Denied.
And even though, and it could be, to this day, I can remember a concert that I played in junior high. One of my friends and I, and we did a 2-piano piece. We were both playing, and we got through the entire piece. The entire piece. This was at a concert. And at the very last bar, the last chord, we got off. And we were supposed to play this last chord together. And I swear I still hear it in my head. And where she hit it, and I was like, it went like kaboom, kaboom, instead of together. And I still can hear it in my head. And that was a long time ago, guys.
Yeah.
And because it wasn't perfect, but everything else was fine. And I find, for example, because I still, play keys and play piano, is that I have to be very self-disciplined that if I make a mistake, that I don't get in my head and start saying, well, that was really, really stupid. Why did you do that? Or whatever. And everybody heard that, and you let people down, you did that. And because it is something I'm passionate about. It's something I really care about. The same thing that when I do some sewing for someone, the way I pursue it, afterwards I'm like, girlfriend, nobody is going to know what you did there.
Yeah.
You don't have to go and make this so, it's like they're going off and having someone hand make this for them. It doesn't have to be to that level. That makes you happy, but maybe that's not necessary.
Yeah.
My level of perfection, or what I'm aiming at, it may be totally different. And maybe it's for you, it's, who are listening, it could be, a presentation at your workplace. The way you're writing something up and you want it to be spaced exactly. I'm sure nobody else does this. It's like, I like the way it looks on the page, and I got to figure out how to space it, and all that.
Yeah.
So it comes out a certain way, and if it doesn't, you send the email and you find a typo in it afterwards, and you just want to kill yourself.
I'm gonna
It's like,
I'm gonna yank it back from the interwebs.
right.
Yeah.
But I think that anything that we care about,
Yeah.
anything that we are invested in, anything we're passionate about, anything that really means something, that's where I think we need to look and say, okay, am I getting off into the hamster wheel of perfection?
Yeah, that's really good. I liked the music analogy you gave when you heard the kerplunk and then it was supposed to be all in one, because it made me think of when I was in choir in high school and we were practicing a song and there were 80 of us on the risers, and my choir professor was like, Megan, you're flat right now. And I was like, how do you know that that's me? And I think that one of the products of lack of transparency in our culture is that we view imperfection as us standing out and us being singled out. And because everything around us gives off the perfect vibes or the perfect look. And so my source of imperfection is going to make me stick out like a sore thumb. And I think if we saw more transparency, we would see that that's not the case.
Well, I think as humans, we want to blend and we don't want to stick out because it makes us feel weird. It makes us just look different.
Yeah.
Our whole different series. It makes us look weird and look different and not be a part of something.
Yeah.
And I think that we're all afraid of that. I think we're all afraid of not being accepted with a certain group, with a certain persona, with whatever it is. We're afraid to stand out. And I think another strand on the perfection thing is, I think what you're talking about, what I got from that is like a product, anything that we're creating. And if it's not perfect, I think my temptation is what I used to view it as, like, if one little thing is off, you might as well just throw out the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's all bad.
Yeah.
If I can't do it perfectly, I'm not even going to start it. Or if you start working on something and it's not going well, it's like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
And rather than working it out.
Yeah. I think the growth in that is, and you tell me about this, the growth in that is realizing that just one small thing that we see as imperfect does not disqualify the whole.
Oh, yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think that has a lot to do with the way that we are created and the way that God uses the gospel to be relevant in our lives. Because he says that I am perfect. God says, I am perfect. I am holy, so you are to be holy too. So I think sometimes we can have this misperception of like, we have to be perfect. We have to be, everything has to be in line. Everything has to be straight. Everything has to, look great. But what the gospel is reaching us and meeting us in our helpless state and in our sin and rescuing us from there. And when we surrender to that, and when we surrender to that story in the gospel of redemption, then he redeems all the parts.
Yeah, that's good.
And so we tend to throw out the whole when one thing is wrong. But what the gospel says is, I accept the whole no matter what was wrong or flawed with it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that really, like, we're flawed. We're not perfect and we never will be, but Jesus accepts us anyways. And I think that as we, if we're going to move and grow from the idea of imperfection to transparency, because I don't think that the flip side is perfection. Like, I don't think that you can put on one end of the spectrum imperfect and on one end of the spectrum perfect. I think it might make more sense to say on one side of the spectrum is imperfection and on the other side is transparency. And our growth grows. We are to grow towards transparency because when we show off those parts in our lives that were not perfect, that's, in my life, what I found is that's where God shows up the best.
Yeah.
Oh,
And the
yeah.
greatest.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And in my weaknesses, he's made me strong. And in the places I lack, he is made up for those places.
Yeah.
And he gets the glory for it.
Yeah. That's so good.
I know before we got started, I was thinking of different scriptures, and of course, the scripture that came to me, I was like, well, this is not helpful. Which is, you therefore must be perfect, for your Father in heaven is perfect. I'm like, so how's that going to be encouraging with what we're talking about? But I remember hearing, as far as what the original language was, that it doesn't really mean perfect for us, like what we're saying, without flaw, because truly God is the only one who can be that perfect.
Right.
And so I was looking it up in another translation because what I've been taught was that it means more like a completeness. And I love this. This is Matthew 5:48. I'm reading out of the Amplified. It says, "You therefore must be perfect," which is growing into complete maturity of godliness in mind and character, having reached the proper height of virtue and integrity, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
Yeah.
So it's a process.
Yeah.
And I love that as far as like maturity, completeness.
Yeah.
And it's just the way it is. It is a process.
Yeah.
I used to be my worst critic when it came to playing keys. Now it's like every once in a while I'll do something and it's like I can very quickly now talk myself off the ledge and just it's like, okay, so you did that, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, but you're not powerful enough to quench the Holy Spirit in a service just because you played a wrong chord.
I'm sorry, but you're not that important.
I think one thing that's really standing out to me as we're talking about this kind of spectrum of perfection to transparency is not only is that how our lives present, but what type of source are we getting our value from? And I think if we look to sources of perfection, like what we might see online, or like for me, it's whenever I cook something from a cookbook, I always look and see if it looks like the picture, right?
Yeah.
Like I make a cobbler and it actually looks like gray Play-Doh and the picture makes it look just incredible. And I'm like, well, no one's going to want to eat this.
Pinterest versus reality.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm using that source of perfection to determine the value of my situation or my
did.
cobbler. Whereas if I were to use a more transparent source like the gospel, I don't think it gets more transparent than the gospel. Or if I put a plate of the cobbler in front of Jordan, he would say it's the best thing he's ever tasted, you know? And so I think that when we're trying to make this move from perfection to transparency, maybe it's also a mindset change of where am I going to pull what types of sources am I going to pull my value from? Am I going to compare to what's being projected in a lens of perfection, or am I going to be more trustworthy of a transparent source?
I think that like more than any other area of my life that I've been tested in this, to lay down the perfectionism mindset is through my motherhood with my kids.
Oh, yeah.
And I hesitate to even talk about it because I feel like, I think that we kind of ebb and flow through seasons of learning, within certain areas. For instance, motherhood. Like sometimes I feel like, okay, we're all surviving and everybody's happy and we're just chugging along and everything. But I feel like then there can be these seasons of where I literally think like, I don't know what to do. And my kids, our kids are constantly, like if you have kids, they're constantly, doing new things, reaching new milestones, charting into, going forth into uncharted territory. And I always tell like my oldest son, I'm sorry because you're the oldest and you're the guinea pig. And I'm learning to be a mom with you. And with the other two, like I kind of have a better idea. I mean, it was like that when I had a newborn. I was like, what am I doing with this first one? But then my second one, I felt so much more at ease and at peace because I'm just like, oh, I know what to expect with a newborn. I know that they cry and that I change their diaper all the time, whatever. But I just feel for Jude, my oldest, because I feel like we are learning about this perfection versus transparency thing together. And it goes back to the very root of what we're talking about. It requires me, in order for him to learn about this, it requires me to be my true, authentic self and not
That's good.
like portray or act like to him that I have it all together.
Yeah.
And that's really scary because as a parent, I want to act like I have it all together or at least have an idea of what I'm doing. But a lot of times I don't. And so leading him through this, if I'm going to set the precedence of like, I genuinely and honestly want to teach my kids, embrace your truest self, embrace who God made you and it doesn't matter if you look different, just be who you are. I want them to learn that, but it's hard for me because I am struggling with that myself.
That's good.
Because I have all these things being thrown at me that show perfect pictures of this, whether it's Pinterest or Instagram or whatever. I have all these ideals and pictures of what I want my life to look like. And sometimes it just doesn't measure up. And I know that my response to those things is also teaching my kids how to embrace this as well.
Yeah.
And that's a really scary place to be.
I think motherhood, and I know I've said this before, but once you become a mother, you're a mother forever. And my kids are all adults, and I still run into those same things because it's like I'm still mom, and I'm mom to adults, and their problems and things that they're dealing with are far different than anything I would have experienced or have expected or anything. And there's so many times when I can come away from a conversation or something like that where I just kind of sit and put my head in my hands and go, man, I just feel like I am failing. I'm just not measuring up. I can't do I feel like I'm just not doing what needs to be done. And, it's like, where's the wisdom that I thought I had? All of those sorts of things, because, my expectation is that I should know what to do.
Right.
And I have to sometimes stop and back off and say, how could you know what to do?
Right.
You've never dealt with this before, or you've never, known anyone or something like that. It's the same thing, when your children are younger. It's like even within, if you have more than one, that there's certain things that are very similar in general ways, but then there's all these other things that are still different. And I think the thing I had to settle on with my 3 children was, yes, I've done this before, but I've never parented this child before.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're different.
I think what you said when you were questioning, like, where is this wisdom that I'm supposed to have? I think that's a trap that we get caught in too when we don't want to be imperfect and we don't want to be the one that stands out according to this perfectionism lens of society. We don't ask questions, and we don't, because that tells people that we don't have it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're asking ourselves, like, where's this wisdom that I'm supposed to have? But we don't ask ourselves, like, how am I going to get this wisdom?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
how am I going to, I got asked to serve in the nursery 0 to 12 months because they were just flooded. And I was in there and I was like, okay, this one won't take a bottle. This one, I can't tell if he can sit up on his own or if I need to like keep a knee propped up behind him. And I was just like, I'm supposed to know these things because I'm getting married. And that means that I'm probably going to have children one day. And I hope to be a mom. So I should know. And then I was like, guys, why won't she take a bottle? And they were like, maybe you just need to warm it up. I was like, okay. But it was just like that whole, even, and I don't even have children of my own. And it was like the pressure of, I should have this maternal instinct of, I should know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And when I ask, it's like, I'm scared of what people will think of me. Like,
Yeah.
oh, good luck when you start.
But
you
the
know?
ironic thing in that is that, like, I can remember when, like, for instance, my kids would have a meltdown in the grocery store. And I felt this huge wave of embarrassment. Like, oh my gosh, just like get it together. Come on. Like everybody's looking at us. Like, don't, I mean, and if you really just take a step back and whenever I see that in the grocery store, I'm like, oh man, I know I've been there. And like, but for some reason we have this idea that everybody's looking at us and saying that we're doing it wrong and we're not, or we should be doing this, or we're not doing this right. And I don't think really any of us are thinking that because we're all just trying to figure out life ourselves.
Yeah.
But I do remember, or like, you know, elementary school age, like, you know, a kid has another confrontation with another kid and okay, so do I need to talk to that parent? But when I talk to that parent, like it requires some level of transparency. Like this is kind of awkward and your kid said this to my kid. And so I don't really know how to deal with this. Like, it's just hard going into those conversations because you want to go in those conversations knowing like you feel you know what you are talking about. Like, well, your kid said this to my kid, and so here's how we should handle it. But I think what I have found is back to the on the road to transparency and growing in transparency, it almost takes a level of humility just to be like, oh, man, I'm just trying to figure this parenting thing out, and your kid said this to my kid. So like, what are your thoughts around that? And, you know, how can we work together to help them, you know, be more confident in them? And like, it's just, it is not easy, but
Yeah, asking for help is like you were talking about being in the nursery and going, you know, asking for help is transparency. It's saying I don't know what to do here, and I think that's probably one of the barriers that keeps us from asking for help.
Yeah.
Is because we do want to know that we're all together.
Right.
You know, I can remember when I used to teach a lot of piano students. I would teach adults and kids, and there's a number of piano teachers who don't like to teach adults. Adults are very different than teaching kids. Kids are used to learning new stuff all the time.
yeah, they're sponges.
Yeah.
Adults are kind of set in their ways.
You know, and adults, it's like
Unfortunately.
I think as adults we're so used to knowing everything and having a handle and being competent, so you say, you know, when you start learning how to play the piano, you have to start from the very beginning. And I always tell them, give me 3 months. It's going to sound really dumb for a while.
Yeah.
But adults learn faster and you'll be fine, but it's going to sound really dumb and simple and
it takes like a huge level of transparency just to say like, yeah, I don't know. And how hard is it for us to do that?
Oh my gosh. I think that for as much as I want to learn and I want to mature and develop in how I do things, when someone tells me that there might be a better way to do something, it's like my pride
Oh, you're
wall
defensive.
goes up
I get so defensive.
so quick. And I'm like, well, you clearly have a misperception of what's going on because let me just rewire your brain really quick and fix you so then I can show you how actually my way is pleasing and good. And then it's like, but don't I want to learn?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's that pride. I think it's just pride, and it goes right up, and it can get in the way of transparency because then that film of perfection goes right back on. And it's like, there's no way, even though 5 minutes ago, I want to learn more about motherhood, but I think I should do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I feel like all this has me thinking of, like, what is then if we're moving from perfection to transparency, what is the vision? Like, almost like I feel like sometimes we need an overarching vision to go towards, and I feel like it's very countercultural, but what if we did embrace transparency over perfectionism? It makes me think of like what that would actually start translating and looking like in our lives. And I feel like it would be a lonely space at the beginning.
Yeah.
But what if we were to be trailblazers and embrace transparency in the areas of our life that we have a tendency to want perfection? How inspiring could that be for someone else?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's redefining maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think in many ways we define maturity as having it all together and knowing the answers and and just being able to negotiate whatever in life and just knowing how to do it and how to do it right. And I think instead it's redefining maturity as real maturity as having humility and humbleness to be transparent and say, wow, I need to learn.
Yeah.
I always need to learn, and I don't know this, and it doesn't matter who the other person is. You obviously know what this is, and I don't, so I need to learn from you, rather than saying, getting to that place of saying I'm this age, or I've done this for a certain length of time.
Yeah.
There's nothing more for me to learn, and if you have a gap, then you're just like, I have to hide it.
Yeah.
And it can be so stifling and suffocating living in the like living on the hamster wheel of perfection.
Yeah.
And you might not realize it, but it not only stifles you, but it stifles the people around you because it doesn't allow them to live into who they truly are. And I think that as we talk about perfection to transparency, I think the key to unlocking the freedom in that is embracing who you are. So like if you love a clean house and you know that about yourself, live into that, and like don't make it a perfection standard, but like if it gives you energy and fuel to like I know it does for me, like decorating my house. I love decorating my house, but I think the shadow side of that is the perfection. And I always have to be very aware of when that's creeping in.
Yeah, that's good.
And it's knowing my true self
Yeah.
and knowing when to be transparent with people around me and knowing when to cap the perfectionism and be like, that is not worth it. And that's damaging to me and it's damaging the people around me.
Yeah. I think one thing that really helps me is we've talked about how, I think Jess, you mentioned it, that at first, stepping into your transparency might look very lonely, and you might feel, and in that loneliness, I think that we tend to revert back to what we felt was comfortable, even though that might mean sacrificing our transparency and kind of getting away from that stifling perfection that we've placed on ourselves. But I think that if we can find a way to not see that as loneliness, but maybe an area that where we have more room to grow, that we can really like fuel and push through that loneliness. Because for me, that looks like having one, maybe at times two people that can really like speak into my life.
Yeah.
And they know my transparent self and they can speak transparently to me. And
they can encourage you to be your transparent self.
yes.
Right.
And in those lonely moments when I've just taken a step into transparency, they can say,
You're going in the right direction.
Yes.
and I'm here with you, and I
Yeah.
see what you're doing, and this is good. And I think it's important that that's just one or maybe two people, because that it can get really confusing if we have lots of different lenses of transparency speaking over us.
I think it goes back to even what we've talked about in a past episode of having healthy relationships and having, like you said, a few people that we can be that way with,
Yeah.
and really let in close, and so that they can walk with us, as you said, and encourage us and things. But also knowing that you're going to be misunderstood.
Yeah.
Not everybody,
Yeah.
like I was thinking just the example you
good.
had about the, going to the other parent.
Mhm.
And in the perfect world, they would just, say, oh, yeah, let's work this out.
Mhm.
In reality, as many times you have those discussions maybe with another parent, and they're going to look at you and go, oh, your kid is just totally wrong and rotten and, or
Yeah.
whatever. And
I
knowing,
feel like I'll be that parent though.
and knowing that you're going to have to deal with it, but that I'm not going to stop being who I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah, that's good.
Because I think God does honor those things.
Absolutely.
We may not get the exact result that we want with the person we're dealing with at that moment,
Yeah.
but he does honor us when we are truly
Yeah.
striving to be genuine,
Yeah.
to be who he created us, and not put up the mask and the false front. But it is good just to have a few people, because a multitude of voices gets really confusing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to have someone who can just encourage you to take another step.
Yeah.
Just take another step.
I think I really loved what you said about God honoring that transparency. And I think that as you step into transparency, he not only honors it, but he honors it in a way that equips you for your next step into transparency.
Yes.
I think personally in my life, I went through a lot of that in my career, and I went from healthcare to education, which I've been asked before, like, those are both failing fields. What are you doing just jumping from one to another? And I found that I was in a failing field of healthcare in a perfectionism environment for me. And in a step of transparency, I decided to take on another career. And right in front of me was a job opportunity, and then another job opportunity that led to where I'm at today. And so I think in that step of transparency, it may not have been the most comfortable thing for me. It wasn't. And it wasn't the ideal setup at the time, but I had an opportunity placed in front of me where I could take my next step of transparency. And I think that he paves the way for us on that journey from perfectionism to transparency as you take steps. And so I think if you're in a step of transparency and you're feeling like it was all for nothing, or you feel alone, I would say I'm fairly confident that there will be an opportunity in your future to let you comfortably step into another step of transparency. Does that make sense?
That's good. Yeah. So I think that perfectionism is definitely not the goal, but I think that transparency can open up a pathway for God's glory to be really big in us.
Yes.
Because it's showing that our imperfections are made perfect by who God has made us to be. And in Christ, we are more than conquerors. And I think that when we show the cracks of our true selves, and we ask God to fill those cracks with himself, it begins to show.
Yeah.
And it's contagious, and it's salt. It's salt of the earth. Allowing our situations, our decisions, our areas in our life allows God to shine through in ways that he couldn't if we just acted like we had it all together and if we were perfect.
Yeah, that's so good.
So hopefully this episode encouraged you, inspired you. If you ever have any questions or thoughts regarding some of the things that we talk about, never hesitate to email in at inspired@dx.church, and tune in next week for a special episode. They're always great.
We will see you next week.
See you soon. Thanks so much for listening. Our hope is that everyone who hears these episodes, near or far, would know that the invitation at our table is always open. You might not be sitting at this table, but our desire is that you would join in on these conversations. So if you were inspired by today's talks, send us an email at inspired@thex.church. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, and questions. And as always, don't forget to rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts.